So, I think it's important to get clear on like, what are your goals? What do you want? If it is just another form of income, great. But is that even going to be the best way to pursue that? Right. I mean, there's no shame even if that is the case, but just get really clear on
Yeah.
what do you want? What are your goals?
Hello and welcome back. Welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy. And guys, today is going to be such a good day. I have with us a very phenomenal person who I've recently become great friends with. And I'm just so excited to introduce you to her. Her name is Dr. Natanya Brown, and she's a board certified endodontist as well as a certified life coach. And she's on a mission to help dentists decrease stress and overwhelm. You can tell why I love her already by learning to process stress and to feel confident making choices so that they can finally prioritize their own self care, live with greater intention, and create more joy in their lives. Dr. Natanya regularly presents on the topics of health, wellness, and burnout and is the host of an incredible podcast I encourage you to check out. And we will leave a link in the show notes called, very aptly named, by the way, the Joyful Dentist Podcast. And without further ado, I am so excited to welcome her here to the show. Hi, Natanya.
Hi, thank you so much for that most kind intro. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely honored to get to be here. And it's been a real joy to be getting, have the opportunity to get acquainted. I
I
love
know.
how the interwebs, brought our universes together. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, it's really kismet for us to be connecting in this way. And so we were recently talking about this journey that both of us have been on in terms of being entrenched in dentistry, in specialties within dentistry, and then changing our whole career paths to coaching, which has been such a fabulous, wonderful, scary, exciting, terrifying experience, all of it wrapped up in one. But I'd love for you to just share with our audience a little bit of your journey of how you made that transition and what that looked like for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I want to actually start with like the end because there are so many people that assume that I left clinical practice because I hated it, or, it's interesting. I just got back from the California Dental Association meeting in Southern California. And as I'm walking around the exhibit hall, different vendors and exhibitors are, trying to sell me different things. And I'd tell them, I'm not your target person. I'm not in clinical practice anymore. And so many of them were like, wow, congratulations. Or, there's like this mindset like, oh yeah, we all hate clinical practice and you're one of the few that somehow, escaped or something. And I
Wow,
found that
isn't that
really interesting. I
interesting?
found that actually really, really fascinating. Like there's so many people that will either tell me congratulations, like you retired,
Yeah.
or they'll just kind of assume that I really didn't like clinical practice. And so both of those are actually completely inaccurate. Like I actually work more now as a coach than I did as an
Mm.
endodontist. And it's just different. It's not a problem actually. But let's just hit rewind many years ago, which, now is 8, 9 years ago. I owned my own endodontic practice. And, coming out of residency several years prior to that was when the economy had kind of plummeted in
Mhm.
2009. I moved out to the Bay Area with my husband. And like so many other dentists, and for sure other specialists in saturated areas, I was piecemealing, a schedule together, and one thing led to another. And after getting board certified, I decided to buy a practice that
Mm.
was for sale. So I bought this practice. I had two young children at the time. Actually, when I bought the practice, I had just found out I was pregnant with my second kid. And, fast forward a year into practice ownership, what I realized was I was running around all day long, putting out fires, and I was ridden with self doubts.
Mhm.
I was totally comparing myself with the other
Mhm.
endodontists, the other more established, I should add, male
Mm.
endodontists in the community. I was really overcome by all the different responsibilities of practice ownership. I felt completely in over my head and I didn't know how to run a practice. And many people assumed that my business guy husband would somehow be helping me to manage the practice. And that really couldn't be the farthest thing from the truth because he didn't know how to run payroll or hire a dental assistant. I had tons of turnover of staff. And what ended up happening was, I would be driving home and most days I would be in a rush to pick up my toddler, by 6 o'clock daycare. I had a really long commute, and as I was driving home, most of the time, I'd just be in tears thinking about,
Mm.
how am I gonna survive another day? And the endodontic treatment itself was not the tricky part. I mean, for sure, maybe there were some cases I would be second guessing how I had a conversation with a patient, etcetera, but most of it was really pertaining to, how am I managing staff? How am I managing my referring dentists? Am I gonna make ends meet? I mean, there were months on end that I was not paying myself. So, the final straw for me was when I discovered one of my assistants was actually stealing in
Mhm.
multiple ways, not just one way. She was a brilliant assistant, fantastic chairside assistant. And at some point, I had moved her to front desk. And so she was cross trained, but she ended up stealing in multiple ways from me, from patients. I mean, I don't even want to get into it. And for me, that was like the final straw. I just said, you know what? This is above my pay grade. And at the time, I didn't really have any community that could help me to problem solve, to troubleshoot, to figure out how I could persevere. I
Mm.
thought my only option was, well, first of all, I internalized everything. Like, this is my fault for being a bad manager, for not knowing what I'm doing, right? Even though I was never taught how to do any of this, but I internalized all of this. There must be something wrong with me. Look
Yep.
at all the other dentists that are successful. And here I am, an endodontist that in theory should be, quote unquote, super successful, whatever that looks
Mhm.
like. And I thought the only option was to sell. So I sold the practice. And, one thing led to another. And this is going to sound super unrelated, but this is my story. So here it goes. I went back to being an associate in an endodontic office. And as I mentioned, I had, my second kid. I was carrying around a little bit of extra baby weight. And I was thinking to myself, if I could just lose the baby weight, I'm going to feel more in control of my life. Like, even though I had sold the practice and I went back to being an associate, it was somewhere in that time. I'm a little fuzzy on exactly, when I came to this thought of like, I want to get fit. And mind you, I had always taken health and fitness fairly. That was always something that was really part of my life. I think I'm actually leaving out some details here. Let me back up for just a moment. During the time that I was in practice, as I mentioned, I'd be driving home and I would be really ridden with self doubt. And often I was crying and on my commute home. I just couldn't wait for the moment when I would get home, finally get my kids to bed and, fed and in bed. And then my husband and I maybe would have 5-10 minutes to curl up on the couch. Maybe I'd be venting to him. And inevitably for me, there was always some form of yummy food involved, right? Like I want some chocolate or I want a brownie or, I want ice cream if we have it in the freezer. I wasn't that picky. If we didn't have anything that yummy, I could just eat a few bowls of cereal. But it had nothing to do with hunger at that point. I had already eaten dinner, right? And so it was just my little moment to
Mm.
decompress, right? And, for those people listening, they might be like, what's the big deal? Who cares? Right? Like, okay, you're eating some snacks after dinner. Don't we all do that on occasion? And I came to realize later was that I was having a hard time losing the baby weight. I was having a hard time feeling in control of my situation. I felt very much like a victim of my situation throughout the process of owning the practice. And even once I sold it, it's not like it was this immediate, like, oh, my life is perfect now. And I'll get into that in a moment. But to make a, kind of condense this down, what I realized was that I was having a hard time creating healthy habits for myself.
Yeah.
I was, really burning the candle at both ends. I wasn't getting good quality sleep.
Yeah.
I was barely finding time to work out. And then on top of that, I was rewarding myself with
Yeah.
food, right? And outsiders wouldn't necessarily have noticed, like they're like, okay, she just had a baby. She's carrying around some extra weight, no big deal. I'm not going to pretend that I had gained, 50, 100 pounds, but I wasn't back to where I felt good in my body. I didn't
Mhm.
have the energy that I wanted.
Yeah.
And I just felt icky. And so in a moment of desperation, thinking that losing weight was going to fix everything, I stumbled upon a podcast that was a female physician who was helping physicians to lose weight. It was called Weight Loss for Doctors. And so I just started listening to this podcast. I was like, okay, I don't know. And by episode 3 or 4, I realized that what she was doing was a lot more than just telling people you got to lay off the french fries and the ice cream and you need to eat hummus and carrots. What she was actually helping people to do was to process their stress throughout the day in a more productive way so that they wouldn't end up doing things like hitting up the pantry or grabbing wine or alcohol or, I mean, there's all these different ways like shopping, Netflix, social media. I, I could keep going. Different ways that we kind of distract ourselves and we pull
Mm.
ourselves out of reality to feel better. And I was using food to feel better for sure. Right. I may not have been able to identify it in that moment, but later on, I was totally able to come back and look. And again, I'm not, judging or pointing fingers or saying it makes any, somebody evil or a bad person. But I knew for me, it was making it that much harder to really fully make the changes that I wanted to in my
Yeah.
life. And that really was the gateway for me to start to think about things more intentionally and become less reactive and feel less of a victim to my situation. And so, long story made short, it was at that point that I really was introduced to the world of coaching and what coaching could do. I have to be honest, before that time, I thought coaching was sounded very pie in the sky, very fluffy. Like, what is this thing called coaching? And if I heard the term life coach, to me, it sounded like quackery. Right. And so it was no small thing when I started to get turned on to, oh, coaching is, it is the possibility of becoming so much more intentional with what you want and how to get it. Right.
Mm.
So one thing led to another. I ended up working with several different coaches, for my marriage, for my weight, general life. And then I decided, you know what, this stuff is amazing. And I think dentists would really benefit from
Mm.
it. And so I decided to become a certified coach. And when I went through the certification, I didn't see it as like this exit strategy from dentistry at all. I really saw it as I was being called
Mm.
to pursue it. And I didn't know what the end would look like,
Yeah.
but I knew it was like there were breadcrumbs and I just felt deeply compelled to just take one step as it came. And so, in an to kind of further expand on my journey and foray into coaching, my first few years as a coach were really focused on helping dentists prioritize their self-care, specifically for those dentists that wanted to lose weight. My transformation really started that way.
Mm.
It was really focused on how am I taking care of my physical body by understanding what's going on emotionally.
Mm.
And so that's really where I started helping other dentists. And then one thing led to another, and it really became apparent to me that, you know, self care is a term that, it's kind of a buzzword these days. You hear so much about self care. And so my coaching has really expanded to really help those people that may not want to be losing weight and yet they are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed in their clinical practice. They may be feeling like they're stuck and they don't have options. And so really taking that bigger approach to, how are you living your life? What is it that you want? How can we help you to be enjoying your life again instead of just feeling like you're stuck in your situation? It's
Yeah,
been a wild ride, and it's been so fun and so gratifying to get to help people in this way, as I'm sure, you feel similarly.
absolutely. Absolutely. As you're telling your story, it's so interesting to hear all the moments in your story in the early stages of when you were reaching for something, food was one of them, outside of you to fix the problem, whatever the
Yeah.
problem was.
Yes.
And we look back, and I mean, it's so obvious when you look back. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that pattern that you saw in your life and how you see that in your clients now.
Yeah. Well, this is such a great question because, I think what we're all taught subconsciously or consciously maybe is that, there's always that next thing
Mm.
that's going to make you happy. Right. And so when you're in dental school, there's like this invisible conveyor belt of
Yep.
expectation of like, you get out and you're an associate for however long, and then eventually you buy in or you partner or you start your practice, and then you practice I don't know how many years, and then you retire, and then you have fun with your life, right? And somewhere along the lines, maybe you get married and you have kids and you buy the house and you get the car and you get like the, fancy doodle or whatever, right? And so, it's so funny because I think a lot of us have the thought also, I'll just interject to this, that we spend all this time and money getting into dentistry and that this is the only thing that we can do.
Mm.
And so, in order to be fulfilled and be happy, we just look to our colleagues. Well, they did it this way, so I must need to do it this way
Right.
too.
Right.
Right? Which is fine. I mean, that's how we learn. We compare, we look at people that are a few years ahead of us and we mimic them, right? Like I think as humans, that's a normal thing to do. However, you know, coming back to that idea of like happiness, right? It's when we're so focused on the end product, we're just going to keep pushing that goalpost further and further and further because there's always one more thing that we could
Yep.
achieve, right?
Yep.
And even for me, like as an endodontist, I got my board certification 10 years ago,
Mhm.
right? And then it was like, okay, well, maybe I've achieved the top of, the endodontics, but there's still more. There's the, oh, but now I can buy a practice. Oh,
Mm.
but now I have a practice loan. So now I need to pay off that practice loan,
I'll be
right?
happy
Or
when I pay off the practice loan.
right.
I'll
Or there's
be happy when it grows to this amount of income. Mhm.
right. I mean, and then if you have children, forget about it. It's like, oh, well, I'll be happy when they get out of diapers. Oh,
Mhm.
no, 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 no. You'll be happy when they get off to kindergarten and you get more time to
Mhm.
yourself. Oh, no, 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 no. You'll be happy once they're in middle school
Yeah.
and they're not so needy on you. Right. So then, and then it's like, but I talk with my friends who have, children that are out of the nest, right? And they're still obviously thinking about their children, worried about what they're doing, and
Yeah.
those problems seem bigger than when you have a kid in elementary school. So, I think it's just a dangerous, slippery slope to just constantly put our happiness as this dangling carrot out there somewhere that's
Right.
not really achievable today, right? What does happiness today look like? And one of the examples I love to talk about, which interestingly, initially I didn't talk about much, and I'll tell you why. The first year, so the school year, the first full school year once COVID hit. Okay, so the 2020 to 21 school year, I up and moved to Hawaii with my family. Okay, and I was not it's for various reasons. We went to Hawaii. We actually didn't realize we were gonna be there the full school year, but it ended up being the full school year. During that year, I was building up my coaching business. I was not able to get a Hawaiian license. You have to actually sit for like you have to take a Hawaiian license with a perio patient and a crown prep and all this. And I had been an endodontist for 15 years and not up for the task of retaking a board exam. So, why do I tell the story of how I had stopped practicing and went to Hawaii, and how was it relevant to other people? Like, why would anybody care about that? The thing is, I think for many of us, and I'm thinking of, the dentists or exhibitors on that conference floor that were telling me, "Oh, congratulations, you
Right.
left dentistry," right? And so what I wanted to tell them was, guess what? I left clinical practice and I went and lived in Hawaii for a solid year. And anybody listening to that would think, she's got it made. That's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to minimize that experience. It was absolutely fabulous. Anybody listening, if you have that chance, go do it. However, if you haven't had that experience, then you probably have had an experience of just going on vacation for a week. I want you to think back to the last time you took a vacation for even just 1 week. Were you permanently happy the entire time? Were you like in this permanent state of bliss the entire time? Probably not. Right? So, sure, we can manufacture the circumstances to be great ones. Like I said, if you have the chance to go to Hawaii for a school year, do it. It's great. However, it doesn't mean that you're just going to be permanently happy and that you're going to have no stress,
Yeah.
right? And if you've got marital issues, you're still going to have them. And if you have financial stress, you're still going to have them, right? If your children fight, they're still going to fight in Hawaii, for example. Right. And so I'm just bringing these things up because we think, oh, if I make X amount of money, or if I pay
Yeah.
off my loan, or if I get to this place where I have an associate and I can scale back, then my life is going to be perfect. And sure, there are certainly tangible ways that we can improve our life for sure. And yet, if we don't know how to become internally resilient to some of the chaos that's going to happen in our life, regardless of where we live or what our circumstances are, then we will forever be vulnerable to making darn sure that our circumstances are perfect. And I'm using air quotes all the time, right? And this is the one of the biggest pitfalls I found myself in as a practice owner, and I know so many other people can identify with this, that need to, well, I need my patients to be happy and to make them
Yeah.
happy, and then I need to bend over backwards and I need to, do everything I can to carefully curate my circumstances so that I can feel good about myself, right? Like if
Absolutely.
patients are happy, I feel good. If staff is happy, I feel good, and so what happens then if you get a negative Yelp review, right? What happens? We beat ourselves up. We totally take it personally. A lot of times we find ourselves in a defensive mode where we want to like prove them wrong.
Yep.
Right? And it's less about the patient and their experience, and it's more about, I need you to like me so I can feel good about myself. And please remove this review so that other people won't have a problem with me. It's a very different energy.
Yep. It's so fascinating because I love that analogy of you literally moving to another state, to a fantasy island, and recognizing that wherever you go, there you still are.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
those same irritations, wounding,
Yeah.
triggers
Yeah.
all travel with you, and that the
Yes.
internal work is what actually changes everything. It doesn't mean you can't still move to Hawaii, but it's
Totally.
recognizing the power that we have within ourselves. So I wonder, can you
Yeah.
remember when you realized that? Do you remember that? I was thinking that about myself as I'm asking that question, I'm wondering, can you remember when you realized, "Oh, wait a minute. The power is actually inside of me. I actually don't need anything to change
Yeah.
in my outside for
Yeah.
me to actually feel great."
Yeah. So there's one thing to learn it intellectually, and there's another thing to feel it.
Yeah.
And throughout my coach training, this was a big theme in my coach training. So I got my life coach certification at the life coach school, and really separating our feelings from the circumstances is one of the big themes of what we're taught. We're trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I learned that throughout my training. That this was in 2020. So this is actually before I went to Hawaii. And I remember learning this and really like, wow, this is mind blowing. This makes sense, on a theoretical level. And as the months went by after becoming certified, that's when it would really percolate and
Yeah.
sink in.
Yeah.
And I would have to actively notice, oh, this is how I'm reacting to my situation. And it's because I'm choosing to focus on these thoughts. Like the situation is not creating that response in me, right? Or creating those feelings in me. So this is of course something that I help all the people that I work with to really come to terms with and to understand for them on a very granular
Yeah.
level, right? And yeah, at the same time, we're all even those of us that are coaches, we're humans first, right? So there are, of course, I have coaches now for sure. I'm 100% a product of my product. I do not claim to have reached any kind of nirvana where I have superseded, thoughts and feelings and I'm just constantly in a state of zen. That has not happened. And yet I feel so much more in
Yeah.
control of my own situation. And one of the biggest things has just been able to create a pause before deciding how I do want to respond in any given situation,
That
right?
right there, I'm so glad you said that, Natanya, because of all the things that we speak about in coaching, I think the practice of creating a pause is one of the most impactful in dentistry in particular. I love that you brought that up. And creating the pause is completely within your own power. And
Yeah.
it's so that moment when you realize that you're not a victim of your circumstances, because I think that's how I was for
Yeah.
many years in dentistry. And you mentioned this
Yeah.
at one point in your story is I felt like everything was happening to me. And I
Hmm.
remember even saying that, like, oh my gosh. I remember, Natanya, I bought my first orthodontic practice. I remodeled because I needed to move it out of the space where it was. And I took out a huge loan and I signed the loan on Friday. And on Monday, the stock market crashed in 2008. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is happening to me. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Every time a team member would give her 2 weeks notice, I'd be like, why is this happening to me? Or I'd
Mm.
leave the house in the morning with the kids crying, kicking, screaming, as every morning, it felt like every morning for so long in my life, there was anger and crying every single morning. And I
Mhm.
remember saying that phrase, why is it happening to me all the time? And it was that realization that we actually get to be creators of our own reality. That for me was the most empowering switch.
Yeah.
And I love what you
Mhm.
just mentioned, the practice of allowing things to just calm, take a
Mhm.
pause, and
Mhm.
then choose the direction you're gonna go into next. I get
Yeah.
goosebumps just talking about it because it is such an empowering place to be.
Yes, it is so powerful. I think
Mm,
there's no better way to put it, and I think that it's interesting, and I wonder if we touched on this in one of our recent conversations, but it can feel a little bit what's the right way to put it? I know sometimes when people hear this, it can feel a little bit like, "What do you mean I'm in control?" Like, "No, these things are happening to me." And I know people can feel defensive.
yes.
Right? And so for sure there's things that are out of our control that, patient leaves a bad review or staff, quits. We may have some influence, but we can't control those things, right?
No.
We can't necessarily ward ourselves off from those things, so that they never happen to us. Those things will happen if you're in practice for long enough, right? And yet how we choose to think about things can 100% determine what we do moving forward, and more importantly, how we feel moving forward,
So important.
right? And that doesn't mean, mind you, that we're just gonna, use our fluffy mindset tools. I'm saying this like in air quotes, right? So that we could just be happy about everything. That's not necessarily the goal either. There's gonna be certain situations where we want to feel frustrated or annoyed or stressed or what have you. And yet it's very different when we are choosing that and we're recognizing that we create those feelings for ourselves as opposed to, oh, well, this is the situation, therefore I'm stressed or annoyed,
Yeah.
right? And then we feel like a victim. We feel like we have no choice.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
hope that made sense.
That makes so much sense. And I was wondering, because you said it's going to happen. I mean, in my example, the economy crashing was completely out of my control. And actually, 99.9% of things are out of our control. That's the truth of it. Really, the only thing we have that we can control is how we choose to feel, how we
Yeah.
choose the thoughts we choose, the awareness we choose to have in the moment. So, really, it becomes a very kind of recognizing the power that you have within yourself,
Yeah.
which I feel like before this work, at least for me, I had no idea about. I
Yeah.
had no access, I had no concept of the power
Exactly.
within me. And I wonder if this was similar to you. And you were talking about that time when you were in ownership, practice ownership, and there were all these other older dudes, seemingly more successful. For me, what that looked like was I was never enough.
Mhm.
Like, I was never far along enough. I wasn't a good
Yeah.
enough boss. I wasn't a good
Right.
enough mom. I wasn't good
Right.
enough in my body. I wasn't good enough wife. And that
Totally.
perpetuated in every component of my life. I just didn't
Yeah.
feel good enough anywhere.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we look at that moment, I'm taking you back to walking onto that floor at the California Dental Conference. When people look at you and say, "Oh, wow, that's so cool. Congratulations, you're in this different sphere now." That not enoughness can follow you.
Mhm.
Just because you're in a new sphere doesn't mean that the not enoughness isn't right there in your consciousness all the time.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think that is such an important thing to bring up, especially like recently, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, dentists asking, how did you get into coaching? And, I'm interested in coaching. And I'm sure you've had people reach out to you in the same way as well, which I think is fantastic. I mean,
We
honestly,
need more.
the field of dentistry needs more coaches. So,
Yes.
yes, I love that we can say that, right? And yet, it's interesting because I would also caution anybody, that grass is greener situation. Like any job is going to have its pros and cons. I chuckle because I recently spoke with a dentist that somehow seemed to think that coaching was a stream of passive income. And I was like, I'm working, I have appointments with clients and I show up to them. I don't have like a corporation with employees that do the work for me. So I kind of chuckled a little bit with that. But, I guess for starters, anybody that would be interested to consider it, you'd have to check your reasons and make sure that you are legitimately interested and passionate about it and not just, as I mentioned, so many people had assumed like, oh, I found coaching as like this great way to get out of clinical dentistry. So, I think it's important to get clear on like, what are your goals? What do you want? If it is
Mm,
just another form of income, great. But is that even going to be the best way to pursue that, right? I mean, there's no shame even if that is the case, but just get really clear on
yeah.
what do you want? What are your goals? And then, speaking to the bigger point that you made, which gets back to the heart of anywhere you go, there you are, right? So
Mm,
if we have, and we all have insecurities, self doubts, areas where we have a lack of confidence, that will come with you,
yeah.
right? No matter what you do, if you stay in clinical practice, if you get some side gig, if you totally transition out, those things are with you. And it doesn't mean that you can't learn how to work with them.
Mhm.
But if you don't know how to work with them, you may be taken over by them, if that makes any sense, right? So it's not just a cure all. I would warn anybody as far as like, be careful the changes you make to your circumstance with the hope or the expectation that now you'll feel good about yourself because feeling good about yourself really is an inside job in every way that I can describe. So,
Yeah, beautiful.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you love about coaching right now? This new iteration of you, this beautiful, successful new career path. What are you
Yeah.
enjoying most about it right now?
Yeah. Well, I love that question. And I love so many things. But if I could just pick one thing that I absolutely treasure about coaching is the ability to help somebody believe in themselves when
Mm,
they previously didn't. And that can look like a conversation where it goes suddenly from painting a picture of, this is what I want, which is out there somewhere, to, oh, and that little spark opens up of like, this is actually possible for me.
Yes.
Right? Like, oh, I actually can imagine myself making these changes. Oh, I'm making these changes. And it's less about the external actions and more about the internal shift where suddenly, I mean, and here I am on video, like kind of using my hands to create an angle. So this might not translate so well if you're only listening to this, but if you just make a tiny, tiny shift, like opening an angle from being an acute angle to, let's say, a 90-degree angle, like, you're not moving, like, I have the base of my hands together, and I'm not moving my hands substantially to open that angle to a 90-degree angle, and yet, suddenly, it's like the
The
world is now expanded.
the wedge of the pie got so much
The
bigger.
wedge of the pie just got so much bigger,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Hopefully that visual makes sense, but, like, you actually don't need, I think this is the biggest misconception is, like, people might think that to, have confidence or to feel better about their life situation, there's all these changes that need to be made, and it feels so insurmountable, and how's any of that gonna
Mm.
happen? But to change your mindset from one of, "I'm totally stuck," to, "Actually, there's a couple tweaks that could be made," right? Just that. Oh,
Monumentous.
it's a monumental thing, but it really only requires the teeniest, tiniest internal shift.
The
Like,
shift.
it's not a massive shift internally. It's not like, "Oh, I need to believe that I'm gonna win the lottery." Like, it's actually not that crazy. And so when I witness, to be a catalyst for somebody and witnessing those little aha moments where they're suddenly able to believe in themselves, like, it's really huge. I love witnessing that, and it's extremely, extremely gratifying.
Oh, so
So,
beautiful.
I
Oh,
I
I
do
love that.
very much love what I do.
I love that. I love, love, love that.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, on the business of happiness, finding out more about how you found your alignment is always it's so good because when we get to hear your story, so many of us can see ourselves in parts of your story and so many of us can relate. What is your current definition of happiness?
So, I see happiness as not a destination, but as moments,
Mm,
and I seek for them pretty proactively. I see it as little opportunities to feel happy throughout the day, sometimes in just, and oftentimes the smallest of ways. And I see it as like confetti that can get sprinkled into any day that I'm
mhm,
alive. Like, it's just
mm,
available. It's not like I don't need to do X, Y, and Z in order to feel happy. It's like
mm,
I just need to look for the little sprinklings throughout my day. So there are moments that are just totally filled with joy. And for me, as I mentioned, it's oftentimes just the smallest little things, walking
mm,
my dog or just a
mm.
moment sitting on the couch with my child or what have you. And I have a story about this that helps me to kind of illustrate it because I do think sometimes we kind of get caught up with like, nope, happiness is not available until I finish X, Y, and Z. It's like ingrained, it's like hardwired in us.
Yep.
And so I have a story that hopefully will help illustrate this really quickly. So a couple years ago, I went on a field trip with one of my kids to a local park, and we were tasked with picking up the trash for an hour and a half. And we had those little trash picker upper things, the long, stretchy go go gadget things. And then we had big plastic bags. So they said, "Okay, great. You're going to pick up trash for an hour and a half." And we're looking around, and honestly, it doesn't look like there's much trash at all. I was like, "We're going to be bored. I don't know how we're going to entertain ourselves for an hour and a half because there's nothing here." Sure enough, we pick up like a bag of, like potato chips or a can of pop that had just, been empty and left on the ground. So we pick up a few things, but I'm like, there's really not much here. Well, 10 minutes go by, and I notice some of the kids are crouched down and they're kneeling and they are like pushing the blades of grass to the side, and they start picking up these small little pieces of cellophane, these little round pieces of cellophane
Mm,
in gold and in red and in silver. And they pick up several. And then all of a sudden more kids come in. Like all of a sudden there's just, we realize that the ground is covered in what I'm imagining must be confetti, maybe from a piñata or multiple piñatas. I have no idea. But there was so much there's no way we would have been able to pick up all of it. The park was covered in confetti.
Mm,
And you wouldn't see it. If you were just standing there, you wouldn't have seen any of it, right? You had to get down on your knees and like scoot the blades of grass apart.
yeah.
And then like the ground was covered. And we ended up collecting 11 pounds of confetti. I mean, this stuff doesn't weigh anything. So to have collected
Wow.
11 pounds, like 40 kids are running around. I don't know how many bags of this stuff, but it ended up weighing 11 pounds of confetti. So I tell this story because, moments of happiness
Yeah.
are available, but we have to believe it's there like a little Easter egg hunt. Like if I were to tell you, Taryn, something amazing is going to happen to you today, right? Now, we might think that means winning the lottery or that means, I don't know, who knows, right? Like something big and glamorous. But like, when I get a hug from my 11-year-old
Mm,
kid who's rather stingy with hugs these days, and I think I had posted that on a recent question of yours on social media when you asked it. When I get a hug from my 11-year-old, I'll tell you that is amazing.
yeah.
So good. So, I think happiness comes in these little moments
Yeah.
and we just have to be available for them, right? We have to
I love that.
recognize them for what they are and be willing to look for them.
And suddenly you can have 11 pounds of it.
You could have 11 pounds of it,
I
right?
love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Oh, so cool. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. That really
yeah,
is such a great demonstration of exactly
yeah,
what it's like to find those moments and precious,
yeah,
precious
yeah.
nuggets of happiness. Oh, so good.
Yes. So I get excited when I think about it in terms of like a little Easter egg hunt every
Yeah.
day, right? Like,
Yeah.
and even I want to even just challenge everybody to think about like on your most stressful day, right? And it's not to say that we need to be happy every day,
Mhm.
but there could be little moments of joy, even like hidden away, even in the craziest, most chaotic of
Yeah.
days, right? And like
Yeah.
even when the circumstances are not ones that would necessarily bring us joy, where might we seek out those moments anyway, right?
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Oh, thank you, Natanya. This is awesome. It's been so great having you here and having you on the show. If people are interested in finding out more about you, where can they find you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. It's truly a joy and an
So
honor to
fun,
get to
isn't it?
chat with
Oh, I
you.
love it. I love it.
So fun. And I'm so inspired by everything you're doing. So thank you.
Right back at you, sister.
So they can find me by just going to my website, which is drnatanya.com. That's drnatanya.com. Instagram at dr.natanya. And those are probably the two easiest ways. I do have a guide that I created, which is the Busy Dentist Guide to Self-Care. And so if anybody is interested in that, that's just a quick compilation of some tips I put together for dentists that feel like they're running around ragged and just want to be able to create more time for themselves without it having to actually be hours on end, right? Like some of us are not in a position to create hours to be doing yoga or meditation or whatever. So without actually having to change a lot of things, how can you start to take care of yourself internally? And so to get that, you can go to drnatanya.com/self-care.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, my love. So great having you here. So great. And
Thank
I'm so
you.
excited. I'm going to go check out that list of ways to take care of yourself myself. So thank you for offering that to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you again. This is
Thank
such a
you.
joy.
And thank you to all of you for joining us here today on this excellent episode. And if this episode resonated with you and you know of a friend who could use that uplifting themselves, please share it with them because that is how we change the paradigm in dentistry. And this is how we support one another. So thank you again. And remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Bye bye. Hey, beauty, if you enjoyed this episode, then like and subscribe to the show and receive this beautiful message of empowerment, remembering what you are capable of and the purpose you serve in this world every single week. And if you know of a colleague who needs this message, share this episode with her. This is how we raise the collective in healthcare, reminding one another and supporting one another. Community is the answer. This is how we grow it. And lastly, I invite you to a phenomenal in-person event this October 2024, the Empower Her Retreat, exclusively for women in medicine and dentistry on the beach. It will change your life. And I cannot wait to see you there. Check out the details in the show notes and have a phenomenal day remembering that you are enough.